This is a day we've long been waiting. This process started probably in 2019, 2020, to do a state risk assessment. It took on kind of many forms. Marcia Kiesler, our OG of CRR in Illinois, started this. Got as much data collected, everything, and kept updating it. And we got to a point where we needed a better organization of it and to make it something that's going to be really useful for the state of Illinois going forward. And enter Stephen Hrustich from Vision 2020, who Stephen's been a partner with us since the very beginning. He hosted the first meeting that I went to. I think that was 2019 back in Naperville, and just opened my eyes to what CRR could accomplish. And it is the new thing. The fire services transformed and taken on many things, from EMS to hazmat to technical rescue. This is the next thing that we need to be paying attention to. We can be so much more effective in preventing risk and emergency calls than we are reacting to them. Much more efficient way of doing it. And it's like I said, really appreciate Stephen being there with us from the beginning and putting this together, and especially joining us today to take us on a tour through the state risk assessment and give us the highlights and his analysis of what he's found. So Stephen, I will let you take it over, brother.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate everybody that's on here. If how can they ask questions?
There is a chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat and let you know.
Okay, we can do that, because once I start this presentation, all I see is a presentation. I don't see, any of the WebEx components here. So let me share that. All right. Is it full screen for everybody?
Full screen, looks good.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So this obviously took on a life of its own as we move forward. Yeah, I remember working with Marcia early on this, provided the template that we use. So we learned long ago that community risk assessments, statewide risk assessments are a big nemesis for the fire service. So what happens is people look at some data, maybe they use a tool, maybe they don't, maybe they look at their local RMS, but understanding how to take this information and put it into a document, which you really, you can't do this without a document. I mean, the document is truly the starting point. If you don't have one, what happens is that you selectively go out and shop for data that sort of supports what you want to do. This is a very different approach. Looks at risk from a holistic level, not only from just fire incidents, and this document, right, is very fire risk heavy. The whole document, I think it came out to about 288 pages. And probably 200 of them, or close to that, 175, are focused on sort of the fire risk. And here's the reason why. It's simply because if we try to have these conversations with fire departments, and we don't focus on this, fire-centric risk that we have, we lose them right out of the gate. So this is a very, I think, strong approach towards that. We've learned that over time that they like to talk fire, and this obviously helps do that. So this, looking at the state of Illinois, 102 counties, 1,107 fire departments. So you folks aren't at a Pennsylvania level, but you're not far away from it. Almost 40,000 firefighters, and there's about upwards of 300,000 fire incidents over the time period that we looked at. Of course, that 659 civilian fire fatalities is something that we'll touch on, right? And that is, I think, a strong way to look at community risk reduction and find out ways we can incorporate interventions to reduce that number. So let's get started here. So let's talk about the document, what it is, first of all, right? Purpose, scope, strategic value that it has. Obviously, right, this is the first statewide risk assessment for the state of Illinois. Right? It's focused on 5 years worth of NIFRS incident data. It combines Census Bureau demographics, social vulnerability analysis, the index there, and also weather, natural hazard. There's a critical information or critical infrastructure piece as well that is a separate piece of this document. The fire service is that's problematic. I think putting critical infrastructure into a document such as this, if it gets into the wrong hands, you're sort of giving away all the answers there. So I'll leave it at that. So what this covers, obviously it has a section of the fire service profile in the state of Illinois, what it looks like compared to national standard or national trends anyways. The next piece is community demographics. That is broken up right into a community profile and a demographic profile. So, you know, when you look at a state, this is that 30,000 foot view. While you have incredible urban areas up in the upper northeast section of the state, right? You have very rural areas to the south. And so this looks at incorporating all those. Social vulnerability, we'll talk more about that and sort of the caveats that come with this. Fire incident trends, structure fires, cooking fires, WUI, arson, vehicle fires, civilian fire fatalities and injuries, as well as fire service fatalities. Injuries, obviously, very difficult to find fire service injuries in NIFRS. That is, I think, just problematic. Most organizations capture them from more of an HR perspective, and they typically don't get into the NIFRS reporting. And then, of course, weather and natural hazards. So how we'll use this document, right? I think this is the starting point, right? This document helps produce conversations on ways to reduce these risks, as well as the state's focus in helping get that done, right? One thing I tell states all the time is that states really don't focus and run CRR programs. CRR happens at the local level. But the state's focus should be to support, right, your 102 or, you know, 102 counties, you have 1,100 plus fire departments, support those local efforts, right, in making measurable change across the state, right? You can use this for grant writing, evidence-based, right? That's very common. I think what we find is most grants, I know I was a grant reviewer, and the place they fall flat is right at that risk assessment. You know, they may talk a little bit about a data, but they don't talk much about how they used it. This really puts that in full perspective, right? Regional planning resource, you know, things in the northeast of the state are not going to be the same as the south. This helps us identify areas that we can focus our efforts to make greater change. Okay, and the last thing there, right? We'll talk about in the last slide those CEF, the statewide collaboration engagement framework, those best practices across all the counties, right? So a little bit about the fire service landscape here in Illinois, right? 1,100 plus departments, 39,000 plus active firefighters. There's 1,800 fire stations plus, and the county served is 102, right? That department distribution, I think, is very telling, right? 65% of the organizations within the state are volunteer. Although here, if we look to the right, Illinois is, if you look at a national average of career and mostly career departments, from a national perspective, it is about 14+%. Illinois is over that number, obviously up in that northeast section of the state, Cook County, Kankakee, around Chicagoland area. You know, you find a huge focus of career and, you know, mostly career organizations, right? The big thing to understand here that there's not going to be one fix that works across a state. This is sort of got to be served up to meet, you know, the resource levels of some of these organizations that may be resource deficient, or those that can sort of take on a greater burden here, right? And when we look at this and we look at some of the information within the document itself, it's pretty apparent where, you know, these problem areas are, and ways that you can take this to CRR strategic planning session and discuss solutions to those areas. So here, this is fire incidents only. This is not, obviously, this is not all fire incidents. Upwards of, I think, I don't have that on my screen right here, but 3 million plus fire incidents over this time period. 280,000 plus were fire service or fire incidents. You know, they fall into that 100 series categories somewhere along the line. There is a 5.3% net increase over this time period, a big blip in 2023. And, you know, I think what you see here is this linear trend line obviously is going up. And what's the best way to sort of get out in front of that, right? You know, reactive suppression, right, is simply that. That is the last line of defense when we're looking at community risk reduction, right? It's that fifth intervention strategy of emergency response. You know, while there's not a fire department in the state of Illinois that's not going to respond to those incidents and try to make the outcome better, the issue is, right, most of that is already decided before that event is finished. So we'll talk a little bit more about this as we progress through the document. There's some caveats here, right? And I think what I'll do is touch on them, you know, and that would be sort of the limitations of the data set, right? NIFRS reporting, we have now moved to nearest. However, right, so if another state or an organization is looking at completing a CRA or a SRA, they're going to be looking at NIFRS incident reports, right? Until such time that we start to get trending or a blend of the two, incorporating some nearest and some NIFRS reporting. That does not match up one-to-one. I'll be the first to say that. There are some challenges there, but obviously it can be done. But from a NIFRS perspective, right, there's the issue of non-reporting entities. So when you look at things like social vulnerability index and your fire trends, sometimes it's just not straightforward. You need to find out the areas within the state that may have, you know, multiple organizations not reporting. So things look very good in that area, but the reality is that you're just not seeing the whole picture. So that is the first piece, right? And I have some of those numbers. We'll discuss that. I just put them up. I think you had 88 departments in the organization or in the state that did not report at all. Now, some of these we sort of understand what they are: Scott Air Force Base, Rock Island Arsenal. Some are DOD. Some are Caterpillar, Citgo. So those make sense, but there are others. You had out of the 1,000, you had 219 that either did not report or reported sporadically. And I think, right, we all understand why that happens. Sometimes the sporadic reporting comes from errors that typically occurred with uploading data from a local RMS through the state all the way up to the national level. So that that is, I think, one of the challenges, but it is the perfect time to sort of address that, right? When we look at this transition to nearest, and I'm a firm believer that the nation needed a new RMS. I love the way that the federal government did it. They went out, found a contractor to build this using Esri's platform, or that will provide a fantastic way to get data that is much more, number one, relevant in the fact that we're not waiting now 2 or 3 years to look at incident data on a national level. So that is probably the biggest piece. And will help us sort of understand these emerging trends that we may have. Lithium ion batteries, right? I know that is a cause for concern from many fire departments across the nation. What that looks like, we just really have no idea until we get into the fact that in nearest reporting, that is much easier to sort of handle and look at. So those are important caveats there that, the data is there. However, you have, every state has some gaps. Every organization has some gaps, right? It's not only looking at the incidents are they reported, but it's the completeness of those reports as well. And for this, I'll give an example of, having a building fire, structure fire, that there is no area of origin, right? That should be something that we have at least an area of origin for every fire that we go to. If we don't, it's a cause for concern from an organizational level. And I think that the state can sort of help push that narrative to get people to report, number one, and report completely, number two. So. All right, EMS, Dominic, workload in obviously the state. 2/3 of all incident calls are emergency medical calls. So again, looking at NIFRs, they provide very little detail other than the fact that we know it was an EMS call we responded to. Once we get, and I'll hit that here, this document, we're still waiting on detailed EMS data. And once that is here, we'll provide a revision of this document to include that, which gives us much more sort of bandwidth and areas for prevention. Community paramedicine kind of programming, things that can help get better outcomes on EMS calls across the state. So. Obviously growing. This is no different than any other state. Matter of fact, the 2/3 number, the reason those numbers are a little lower is a lot of times, right, you have many volunteer fire departments that are not providing EMS service or the very sort of BLS first response levels, which produce less calls. So, transport organizations obviously have a larger share of this as well, right? This is, I think, something that will be very telling once that data occurs. So that they're in the process of obtaining that, but it required lawyers to get involved to get that data from the state to the state fire marshal's office. So we'll talk more about that when it comes in. So. Cooking fires, right? Obviously, it's the most preventable risk that we have, right? We average 16 a day within the state. That's a 3.9% increase over the last 5 years. And of course, the kitchen is the #1 area of injuries. So that makes total sense here. 59% of these are in multifamily dwellings. Again, we see that number is going up. That linear trend line obviously shows this is a challenge, right? When we look at cooking fires, it's important to understand that if we're looking just at what was in the NIFRS data set from the warehouse, the 113s, that is just a tiny subset of the cooking fires that you have. The other challenges when we look at this is the vast majority of cooking fires are never reported to the fire department. So if we took this and looked at the real problem here, where we look at structure fires with area of origin in the kitchen, most of those would probably be cooking related fires. Obviously, you need to look at #1, not only the area of origin, but also the item first ignited. There are errors in that reporting. When people report item first ignited was a kitchen cabinet, that is likely not the case. 99% of the time that started as a cooking fire in a pot or pan that obviously got out and moved from a 113 to a 111, and that would provide the detail on understanding that this was a cooking fire that sort of got out of control. We look at 113s as near misses. Obviously 111s are very different in the fact that that fire got out of the pot or pan and caused much more damage, right? So what can we do here? There's some CRR interventions, right? Smoke alarm programs are important, unattended cooking educational campaigns, structurally or culturally adapted outreach in multilingual communities, right? Elderly focused cooking safety programs. And then here, when we look at the problem, many people look at a fire problem as this monolith, and you really can't do that. What needs to happen is you need to start to break this fire incident down by looking at not only area of origin that gives us insight into whether those are cooking fire events, but also occupancy types. And that provides much more detail in, okay, now we've got this subset, 59% cooking fires in multifamily dwellings, right? If I looked across the state, that number 59%, obviously you have more 1 and 2 family dwellings. So the risk obviously is higher in multifamily dwellings for cooking fire events than it is in 1 and 2 family homes. That's a caveat that's an anomaly that most fire departments see this cooking fire problem in 1 and 2 family homes. This provides some detail to say this is a challenge where we want to identify those areas with cooking fires in multifamily dwellings, and gives us the ability to sort of go at that single piece of the fire problem, right? When we do that, when we break things down and we look at them by occupancy type, by incident type, by occupancy type, item first ignited, area of origin, provides much more detail in how we can provide interventions that will make the problem better, right? 408 kitchen and cooking injuries. And again, that number's there. It obviously comes out of the NIFRS data set. That number is woefully low. I can tell you that. That number is probably 4 times that. Just because, again, many times fire injuries are just not captured in NIRS. Once again, perfect time to sort of address those things moving forward with NIRS and tell people why that is. So, right. So the key takeaway here, obviously, cooking fire prevention is the highest return single prevention investment, right, the Illinois Fire Service can make. And there are things that you can do. There are obviously technology advancements that can prevent cooking fires. You can also look at with the outcomes that come out of these events. How do we make the outcome better, right? How do we reduce injuries, fatalities from cooking fires events and fire loss as well, right? So that I think is important to understand. That again looks at some of these challenges. Many times people say, well, that costs a lot of money. We don't have money. I always tell everybody, listen, that is just a problem. And we need to solve problems. We're problem solvers. The fire service is problem solvers, right? And that's just one of the challenges. How do we overcome those kinds of roadblocks to make better outcomes in the state? So, man, I'm just going to stop there and see if there's any questions before I move on.
Yeah, looking at the chat, I do not see any questions yet, Stephen.
Well, I must be doing a really good job then, right? Come on, Robert Morris, you have some questions here. I'll move on, right? Structure fire risk, right? It's not random. It's if you look at the maps, it follows very distinct geographies within the state, follows within sort of SVI, the Social Vulnerability Index, and how that all plays out, right? The 52% of all fire incidents are structure fires, right? Which is substantial, right? When we think about WUI, when we think about vehicle fires and all these other other fire types that we have, 52% is a substantial number, right? 49 building fires on average per day in the state of Illinois. 145,000 structure fire incidents in that time frame that we looked at, right? The roadmap or the map here is 52% of that 52% of those incidents occurred in 100 cities in the state. So I think that here, looking at that bar graph on the bottom, right? Obviously, Chicago is going to be a leader in most everything here. They have right the highest population. So when we look at things per capita, they actually fall, right? It works against them when we look at fire incidents per capita because they have such a high population, right? And some of these other high volume communities, right? Peoria, we see on there. Peoria, very familiar with Peoria. We went there back in 2021, I think, to do a on-site project with the Peoria Fire Department to create their community risk assessment, to walk them through this process, have stakeholder meetings. And I think what came out of that was incredibly important for the organization. I thought the biggest takeaways were the focus from the firefighters, the company officers, even the union president said, I just never realized how much the data supports all the things that we're doing and how we can utilize that to make, in this case, Peoria safer, right? Calumet City, Rockford, Springfield, Decatur, those are, and this is included within the document itself. There's a map that sort of showcases these 100 cities with the structure fire risk problem, right? They've got some challenges, right? They're not building a lot of new structures within, right, the city of Chicago, right? The housing stock you have is predominantly from the 1950s and maybe 60s, but it is built out, right? So when we look at these things, A lot of times there's conversations on, fire sprinklers, home fire sprinklers. Understanding that's probably never going to solve the problem. And I'm a firm believer in home fire sprinklers. But the fact is, they're built out. The chances of going in and retrofitting these buildings is probably slim to none, especially these single, 1 to 2 family homes. So I think that's a challenge. And how do we overcome that, right? What are the things that we can do to get better outcomes when it comes to, um, you know, the, uh, the fires in this aging housing stock? High poverty and rental occupancy really critical in the focus here. That's why, again, community risk assessments are so important in for any fire department across the nation, knowing where those areas of high poverty are. That's so SVI index, right? Rental occupancy numbers, right? If we look on a national level, typically that shakes out somewhere around 65% owner occupied, 35% rental occupancy. You need to know that number. It is very telling in the fact if you're inverse of that, and I speak to this because it just comes from experience. When I was in New York, I looked at that, and I was 60/40, but I was inverse, right? My rental occupancy was 60%. My owner occupied was 40, and it told the whole story. It laid it out why we were having the fires we were having, why we were having fire fatalities in this rental housing stock, and it provided us right the pathway, to go out and address these things. Right, limited smoke alarm coverage. Right, obviously, aging housing stock was not built to current, or even 2020 standards requiring smoke alarms, right? So these things in here are probably single station smoke alarms. They're not interconnected. The changes in the fire dynamics over the last 30 years is a telling issue in why, right, we're having 30% more fire fatalities than we did in 2010, right? So those things are, I think, important to know. Um, Many times when we talk about community risk reduction and in how that sort of plays out within organizations, I always ask firefighters, why did you get in this job? And the fact is, right, there's a wide range of things, but most of them sort of settle on I wanted to help people. Having the understanding that many of these people that you want to help, if you don't help them before the event occurs, the outcome is not going to be what you or they want. And I think that's an important piece that helps them understand how the fire service fits in logistically to CRR efforts, right? And we understand, right? Constrained local fire service resources. I don't care where you are across the state. There's probably not a fire department in Illinois that doesn't want more resources. The fact is, will that come to fruition? It is likely not going to happen, right? But the data tells us where those areas are that really need additional resources. We're going to look here at mutual aid here in a second, and I think that's pretty telling, right? And here we are, right? So the vast majority, right, 60% plus of incidents required no aid. So this is all, again, this is looking at those 280,000 fire incidents only, right? So this takes into account, right, woolly fires, car fires, trash, rubbish fires, and I think that's important, right? This is the whole gamut. It's not the 145 structure fire incidents. So if we broke that out and looked at the ones on the bottom, right, we look at the net aid export, 28,737 from capable constrained departments, right? aid recipient departments have the least capacity for prevention programming. So these things all sort of fall in line, right? If you're looking at having to bring in mutual aid or auto aid for many calls, chances are you have prevention bureaus that's probably not staffed the way you'd like them to be, right? And I think a lot of that is a very telling story, right? And that's that the auto aid and mutual aid again is pretty telling in what that means. There's a map in the document as well that really shows or highlights these areas that are seeing a lot of sort of mutual aid activity. And, that's in the top northern tier. There's also others in there as well. I know looking at the data, right, there's obviously even a push or a spillover into the state of Wisconsin from many of these departments up there. So it's a challenge. And again, what does that look like in 10 years from now? I think that's important. I think the fire service nationwide is heading to a decision point on how do we best fix this. So, okay. So let's talk a little bit. Where am I here? 39. I'm pretty close to where I need to be. So this is really important. Social vulnerability is the master risk variable, right? This is, I think, critically important for folks to understand, what SVI means and how this impacts fire departments, across the state, right? We have 4 counties in the state that are very high, right? They're greater than 0.75. And you have some Alexander that's a 0.97, or in Pulaski. That's a very common name in many different states, and I know it's pronounced differently. But when you look at a 0.97 or a 0.92, that alarm bells should go off. Those are incredibly high SVI, social vulnerability index numbers. On the the converse of that is the ones very low, DePage, Kendall, that are 0.14, right? So what, right? We see to the right here that we've got Alexander, Pulaski County, Hardin County, and Pope County that are what I would consider off the charts, and really I think scream for a focus from your planning team, your partners in your coalition to say, what can we do to get out in front of this, and what CRR investments can we make in these, particularly in these counties, right? And again, I think that what we need to see is that, again, looking at some of these counties, you may have organizations that are not reporting. So you're not seeing the true picture of the fire problem based in that county compared to the SVI. That's why in that there's a bivariate map here that we'll look at it in a section in a second that highlights that and really looks at these areas that are important, right? The big thing that came out of this, I think the key takeaway, I'm going to actually read this, is right, that social vulnerability index ranges from a 0, very, very low, to a 1, which is exceptionally high. Right, DePage County, one of the wealthiest suburban counties in the country, scores of 0.14, essentially as safe and resource rich as a county can be. Right, Alexander County, on the converse, extreme southern Illinois, scores a 0.97. Meaning it's among the most vulnerable communities in the entire United States. The big piece here is for Illinois, the distance between those two numbers, 0.14 and 0.97, is the largest gap between the best resource and worst in the state. No other state in the Midwest has that wide a spread between its highest and lowest county SBI scores, which means it is the widest intrastate gap, again, in the Midwest. So something right from a key takeaway, this is one that I think is important to understand. So when we look at that bivariate map of the state, right, we see, right, these sort of top priorities. Cook County up in the top, Kankakee is up there as well. There's a number of others as well that are in the blue that really focus on that high SVI plus high fire death rate. Again, this may not tell, again, the whole story if you have organizations that are not reporting. So because those, right, we know we captured the number of fire fatalities in the state, but we don't have detail on many of those, right? We only have detail on the ones that were captured through NIFRs. And we all understand, right? Sometimes we have a fire, someone is rescued, they go to the hospital, they're alive, and then they pass away. I get it. That is was always a challenge, making sure that NIFRS was updated with that. Many times it is not. Once that report's put in, it's basically gone for good. So those are some things that really need to be further understood. I think this, again, is an important point when we talk at the end here about these 8 best practices that the state can look at, how fire fatality review is done on a statewide level. And you will provide me some insight on that. I'm going to open it up to get some feedback here as we talk about those things. So Woolwich fires, arson increasing, right? Woolwich had a 35% single year spike, arson 29.1% in a year. They're both trending upward. I know, right, the top zip codes when we talk about arson: Mount Vernon, Springfield, Peoria, Benton. That does not mean that others are not as bad. Maybe they don't have the resources and they're not understanding the problem. They're not capturing the problem from a data perspective. So again, very familiar with Peoria. And the one thing when we were doing their community risk assessment that stuck out to me was the fact, man, did they have a arson problem, right? And being in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, we had an arson problem. Peoria rivals that. But again, they have people there dedicated that are really conscientious about making sure this information is captured. Matter of fact, when we were there at doing their on-site project, they had a fire I responded to, and it was in a vacant building, right? These are important pieces to understand when we look at vacant buildings, what that means, right? They're dangerous to firefighters. There's countless number of events that occurred with extinguishment in a vacant building, and a tragedy occurs, right? So that is, I think, something important, right? Woolwich fires, I think just understanding the issue there, many of these are probably smaller, but I think that, again, as we see some of the incidents that are occurring around the United States, people understand the urban interface a little better, and how wildland fires are sort of impacting communities and developments within those communities. So this right, Woolwich and arson closely mirror the SBI county map, both demand prevention investment in those same communities. Okay, so we are I think we have 4 more slides here, right? The 659 civilian fire fatality in Illinois during this assessment. again, 132 per year. You know, your peak was in 2023, 2024. That dropped off significantly. Does that mean the problem is over? And what I tell people is a year does not make a trend. So it'll be interesting to see what 2025 data shows for this as well, right? We had a reduction in civilian fire injuries during that time period too in 2024. So that remains to be seen. I think knowing some of these issues, right, when we look at this spike and you know, and what that means to the state, you know, what is, right? It's an acceptable risk number. What I know this is very difficult for many fire departments to grasp this idea of acceptable risk. But obviously within a state, you're going to have fire fatalities each year. What is that target number that you want it to get down to, right? And most would say 0, but that, I think, from a reality perspective, I don't think that is based on reality. So that, again, right, when we go to this planning, CRR planning, based on this document, right, you'll have those discussions to see what is acceptable from a statewide perspective, and you know, how do you compare to other states that are similar in size, right? We'll talk a little bit more about fire fatalities. Obviously, bedroom leads is the area of origin here. 75 fatalities in bedrooms. Kitchen cooking was 53. Living room den. You know, my guess is those living room den, they were probably trying to escape. The ones in the bedroom may or may not. So I think this is a telling story that really needs to be more understood. That happens with fire fatality review, right? The multiple fatality fires that you had 72 events over those 5 years. They accounted to 175 victims. So, you know, if you look at strictly your numbers, you're over, right? Just multiple fatality events takes you over that sort of your average number of fire fatalities per year. So there's 53 communities affected statewide, right? And obviously Chicago had 12 events with 28 victims, which makes sense just because of the population that they have. The Bellevue, right? They had 3 events with 7 victims. That's probably something that would be less understood. So that, I think, is important to understand. And again, right, knowing, having an idea about these fire fatalities, knowing what happened, I always say, tell this story, right? I ask my fire investigators, why did that woman die? And, you know, typical answers were smoke inhalation or byproducts of heat, you know, smoke from a fire. And I said, no, that is not, that's how that woman died. And if I want that information, I go to the coroner. They'll tell me exactly how that woman died. Why is a very different question. You know, there's probably, there's been a few, but most people don't want to die in a fire event. They're going to do everything they can to escape that. So the knowing the why is important to preventing that from occurring again. All right, so the assessment, right, as it relates to CEF, which is a statewide collaboration engagement framework, Vision 2020 has put tremendous effort into this CEF framework over the last 6 years, right? When we first started, when I took over in 2019, I said, listen, I want to scrap the statewide work because it's really not meaningful. This statewide collaboration engagement framework was developed post 2019 that really helps us understand more about what's happening in states across the nation. We can find out where efforts, you know, CRR efforts are really taking place in a strong way. and where they're just not taking place at all. So I think these are important. You know, these are the 8 best practices. Number 1 is this statewide risk assessment, and congratulations, you have, right, you have mastered that. And it truly is the baseline for everything in the 8. And without it, states are so far behind in understanding many of these challenges and how to address them to support prevention and risk reduction across the state. 2, sound off early childhood education, right? 18.1% of Illinois' population is under 15. So there is a great opportunity there. You know, what's happening, and I know the state is well involved with sound off. How do you spin that even further into, you know, some of these areas that are resource starved, right? Maybe in the southern part of the state, or these very high population areas that probably need some help as well. So community risk intelligence exchange, that is I think the number 1 piece for states moving forward, right? Putting this information out, right? There, along with this statewide risk assessment, we developed a companion document that's focused on the internals of it, that extracts that information and puts it into small snippets for social media posts. For you know, it looks at exactly what's going on in the state and helps relay that to, right, your 1,100 plus fire departments, also to other stakeholders and partners that you may have in your coalition. That is a way to help people get behind what's going on here in the state. Fire fatality review, right? The 659 civilian fire fatalities that you had, as well as the fire service fatalities. I know the state's had some, you know, some really tragic issue, you know, deaths that occurred here as of late. And, you know, while most of those from a fire service fatality, right, a NIOSH report will come out on that fire fatality, these 659 civilian fire fatalities is the opportunity, right? How do we put together a team to say, okay, we're going to look at this and look at each one of these fire fatalities. And I know that 659 number seems large, like how are we going to pull this off? But if you look at on you know, on a yearly level, right, you could start with 2024, 2025 numbers, and that provides, right, you're probably looking at 12 a month here. But again, that helps you understand what happened here, that we can make some kind of intervention so it doesn't happen again, right? And maybe that's early warning through smoke alarms. Maybe that is cooking fire, you know, addressing cooking fires in multifamily dwellings. I don't know what the answer is there. You would have to look at each one of those. This is a very satisfying thing to do. When you know and understand fire fatalities at this level, you are speaking a total different language than you have in the past. So that is really important. Cooking fire reduction, right? 31,000 incidents. How do we lower that? What helps us get that to that number that we want it to be? And that may be, right, taking that cooking fire, reducing the problem, making it very specific, and say, okay, we're going to focus on cooking fire reduction in multifamily dwellings in these 5 specific communities, right? And have pilot programs within these 5 communities to see, can we get that number down, right? Youth setting, fire setting, prevention, intervention. I think that is an important thing. I know Dale Smith is working with the state in putting these incidents into Y-Fires, which is a Vision 2020 product. We've got some new YFPI resources that are coming out. We have a YFPI mobile app that helps get resources to where there's nothing worse than a fire chief saying, I got this fire, use fire setting problem. I just don't know what to do with it. This gives the ability to say, how are we going to support those areas within the state that just don't have the resources to do anything about the problem, right? Home safety visits, working smoke alarms, right? We know they work. And, what's the bandwidth to increase the focus there? I know Illinois has a statewide smoke alarm program. Can that morph? Is there things that we can do within that program to tweak it, make it a little better, to provide more data, more information coming back into not only the changes we've made in these homes, the areas where those changes were made geographically, and what does that mean? What does it look like to reduce? Right. The last year, firefighter safety, health, and wellness. This is a big focus of Vision 2020. Our new CORE framework came out at the symposium. CORE stands for Communities and Organizational Risk Engagement. This is the big swing and miss for CRR over the last 20 years, right? CRR was viewed as a sort of prevention discipline and touted as such, and the conversations we had just didn't engage the 99% of the fire department, the operations people, to see what these principles and practices, the 6-step process, could do for firefighter cancer, for firefighter mental health issues, you name it. All those problems, if you used the CRR framework, the 6-step process, you are going to come out with outcomes you can measure rather than outcomes that you just have no idea. We implemented a program, but all we tracked was the number of people that went through it, or counting doesn't get us to where we understand if we're making a difference, that impact towards reducing risk and the outcomes we desire. So very important piece. You are going to see so much of that from us moving forward. I think that is a really important part of our training that we have. The 5 new courses on CRR Academy, they will have a large component that's focused on organizational risk engagement, right? Call to action here is my last slide, right? Use this document to your advantage. It is the baseline for your CRR investment, how you support fire departments across the nation, across the state, to understand the problems better, to get out ahead of them, look at intervention strategies, bring more people into your coalition, and help the ones that are in the coalition understand the problems better, right? Share those 100 social media posts that was put together, right, as a best practice to get people to understand what those are. Prioritize smoke alarm coverage in homes across the state, right? Commit to improving, that should say NIFR's reporting fleet, it should say nearest at this point now. Better data produces better targeting of our CRR investment. And then again, this is the perfect time. Nearest transition. The state should help people understand that putting in structure fires without an area of origin or without item first ignited, it probably means that that event, that incident should have been investigated by someone. If we're putting those in without that kind of critical data, it's truly problematic in understanding the problem on a national level. So, all right. So we have reached the end. And how'd I do? I was 2 minutes over, but we started late. So I'm going to stop my share. And I'm going to go back here to see if we have any questions.
Stephen, I haven't seen any questions yet, but I could open up the floor if anybody does have any questions for Stephen. Does anybody have anything? That was a very great, it was an awesome presentation, and we're really excited to dive into this and really get going even more. I mean, this is a huge milestone for Illinois CRR, and we appreciate all the work that you have done to help us get to this point, and Marcia's help also with getting us to this point. So if anybody has questions, please unmute yourself, ask away. It says, hey, my mic isn't working. Quick question on B-Alarm smoke alarm program. Mike, if you want to type that in there, I don't know what your question is on the B-Alarm smoke alarm program. But we are adding a lot of departments to the B-Alarmed. I know that we're doing a blitz again in October. That was kind of a brainchild that came about from North Carolina, who does kind of targeted smoke alarm blitzes across different parts of their state by using data. And so we kind of brought some of that to Illinois and plan to do it during Fire Prevention Week again in October. And we're looking forward to kind of focusing and using more data to maybe kind of focus that on some of those areas in different parts of the state. But that's something that, yes, the B-Alarm program is growing. We're actually meeting with the Red Cross and kind of working closely with them as well to try to increase the outreach with that. Any advice on expanding outreach? We have utilized social media, mailings, pub ed, advertising, etc. We utilize the blitz, but after the initial rush of people signed up, we aren't signing up many. That's his question. Steve, do you have any suggestions, advice on ways to get more information out?
Yeah, well, number one, to sort of engage here, I think the fire departments. So Mike, I'm not sure where Mike is from. That may help. But right, we went through this many times. We see a saturation point, and then things drop off. But here's a great point, right? Here's a great part of the CRR process, right? It's cyclical. This tells me if people are dropping off, there's probably something within your process evaluation that just isn't clicking, right? And it's no harm, no foul. We simply go back and look at that and say, where are these people, right? Listen, I did this smoke alarm programs in New York 25 years ago, right? This was way before this was even, an issue. Home safety visit programs we did we specifically focused on those rentals. So Mike, I think the biggest thing here is, I'm not sure if you're talking about your community, maybe somebody else can help me, or the state as a whole. If you're focused on just your community, a couple things I would look at really quick. What is my, rental to owner occupied rate? What does my housing stock look like? And then from there, I think you get a good picture, right? There's a table, Census Bureau table. It's called DP04. So if you Google U.S. Census Bureau table DP04, and then you type your Streamwood, that will help you get to the right. DP04 used to be part of the the census sort of quick facts, and then they moved it out. And there's so much information in that DP04 that is really, really important, right? Looking at your housing stock, and this will give you insight as to, okay, these are the ones, right? These houses that were built from the 50s to the 70s. That's where I want to focus. Where do I look? Then I start to look at census tract data. So there's really great ways to do that. Maybe that's just a good CRR Academy course for us to do and put on to help people understand that. We talk a lot about that in our we had a data collection analysis training that has went away since the NIFRS warehouse went away. The data sets are no longer available in that format. So we are now in the fall, we partner again with Esri for 12 new courses, community risk intelligence courses that are going to be focused more on the GIS platform. The data exists, it's out there. It's just a little more difficult. But in my eyes, I think I like the product we get from the NIFRS warehouse. Now, I think when Nearest gets here, things will get better, but it's right. You're going to have to wait 2 or 3 years. And I tell everybody, don't wait, just go do it now, right? Because if you wait 2 or 3 years, you're just 2 or 3 years behind. So looking at this social media, I used to send, right? I sent an injured crew out to a grocery store in our area on a Sunday morning, right, when people are getting out of church or whatever, and they're coming in the grocery store, and they would have a table there. Things like that can help drive business, and especially from a risk assessment or a risk standpoint, right? Working smoke alarms now are so critical. If you don't have them, your chances of surviving a fire event in the home are just so low that it's the fire dynamics. When you look at the modeling and the things that are burning now and time to flash over, right, 2 to 3 minutes. I know fire departments hate me when I say this, but there's probably not but a handful of fire departments that have a 2 to 3 minute response time. And if they did, the fact is that, right, when that flashover occurs, when you get on scene, doesn't mean you're providing firefighting and rescuing. It takes you another 2 to 3 minutes to set up. So even the best equipped, trained fire departments are up against. It's simply a mathematical equation, right? It's just the time factor. We can't beat the clock. We didn't cause it. The fire service didn't cause it. It's just the things that we have brought into our home. So even a home built in the 1950s doesn't react to a fire the same way it did in the 1950s or 60s, right? Everything has changed in that home. Everything we bring into the home has changed the dynamics. And I think that's important, right? So focusing on those things and why they're critically important, looking for avenues. If you don't, the one thing I'll say here with this, you're from Streamwood. I don't know if you do sound off. So the state does work with Mary Kay. Sound Off was an early childhood education program that was developed for 2nd and 3rd graders. We were part of the early model to pilot that when I was in Georgia, in Atlanta. It is exceptional. And you want to talk about opening doors to get in people's houses. This will help, right? So looking at those things, it is so different than our folks going to school, putting gear on, and showing people what firefighters look like with gear on, right? That is, you're just likely not changing behaviors. What you're looking for is opportunity, right? And how do we generate opportunity? And one of the homework assignments from that sound off is they go home, they count the number of smoke alarms that they have, they report back on the number, right? The delta there, the number they have, and the number that are working, right? And it gives you the ability to say, okay, this is a home that really needs our help.
And Stephen, there's a lady down in O'Fallon who's doing a smoke alarm scavenger hunt. She sends out, goes into the classroom, gives the kids a little homework assignment, and then they bring those flyers back to the teacher, and she gets real-time data in her community by just utilizing those kids. I mean, kids are going to say anything, right? I mean, they'll tell the truth. They'll squeal pretty quick.
They certainly will.
And so she's been doing a great job with that. And then they focus their targets on certain areas where they're seeing maybe a dip in working smoke alarms, or if there's no smoke alarms present, and they're able then to canvass that neighborhood. So what a cool program that Sarah is doing there in O'Fallon as well. Do we have any other questions? Matt just put something.
There you go. So Mike, I offer, right? We have always spent a lot of time in Illinois, right? We have focused our efforts here for many, many years. Since I got in, we've probably been to Illinois more than any other state in the nation. Why? I just love, I can feel the energy when I walk in a room with people. I love the energy in Illinois, right? I went to some other, I recently went and provided a keynote at another state. I can tell within 2 minutes if people understand it, or if this is just flying over their head. I offer, shoot me an email. You can send it to Hrustich or info@strategicfire.org. And I'll shoot you some tidbits on Streamwood. Is that Streamwood? Yeah, Streamwood. That might help you. And again, you know, if when we come back, we will be back in Illinois for this. I think the DCA course was the largest number of classes that I taught for the DCA were in Illinois. I think we did 4 of them there over the course of 4 or 5 years. But I would keep an eye out for this new community risk intelligence one. I think that will help as well.
Do we have any other questions for Stephen today? If you want to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. I mean, this is, we go to we hold our conference, and you've been to our conference. You could tell the folks there were really excited and wanted to engage in community risk reduction across the state. And we appreciate you guys really working hard with us in Illinois and providing all of these amazing resources. I mean, it's something that we're lucky to have.
I have to say to that, right? Kudos to Marcia Giesler, and kudos to the state, for the people within the state that saw the value that she brought to, you know, to the state, her organization as well. And right, you just don't find that. And someone that dedicated, that someone that provides guidance and just is truly engaged. They want to help. Kudos to her. Hey, you're welcome, Marcia.
Marcia deserves a lot of thanks.
Yeah.
She's amazing, and the energy she brings, I don't know how anybody keeps up with that energy. So, well, seeing no more questions, this is recorded, so we're gonna post this out there, Stephen, on our CRR Facebook pages, on the CRR website, the OSFM's website, which our CRR website now has migrated to under the OSFM umbrella. So this will be in a lot of different places. So if those folks that were not able to join us today, they're going to be able to go in and watch this presentation. And we're really excited to get into this and use this now to really start pushing that message and working with our partners even more in depth across the state. And those Southern Illinois counties, those ones you were talking about, definitely need some of those extra resources. And we've been down there looking at some of that stuff too. So we appreciate you guys all joining us today.